Okay, let's learn some history. First, Milan, Italy of 1880. What was it? Well, it was a conference for deaf educators, right? Teachers for the deaf. It was international, all happened in Italy. They were there to discuss what kind of communication was best for deaf people. Oralism, which is speaking, learning to speak, or sign language. Right? We had 2 camps. Boom, boom. All right? And for each group, they had a representative. Names that you should know pretty well. Over here, we have Alexander Graham Bell. And over here, Edward Minor Gallaudet. Alexander Graham Bell. What did he do? Oh, that's right. He created the telephone. Did you know that he created the telephone to help deaf people? His wife and his mom were both deaf. If he wanted them to learn how to speak, right? If you can hear it and speak it, or maybe be able to hear yourself talk. Anyway, hearing people won that one. Over here we have Edward Minor Gallaudet. Gallaudet, we know that name. From where? Thomas Gallaudet, right? So Thomas Gallaudet is Edward's son, okay? Edward was young when his dad Thomas died, right? But he continued his father's passion for sign language. So he supported ASL, or sign, as communication for deaf people, right? But it was declared that, after this conference, guess what? That spoken language was better, even superior to sign language. What did this mean? Well, being in an international conference, trying to decide what communication is best, oralism won. Sign language was banned. Now, there were 2 countries that said, no, this is not okay. We do not accept this. The US, yay! And Britain, thank goodness, right? Now, this did not mean that oralism was not gonna come to the US, but at least we would fight it, and at least sign language could have the chance to continue. All right. They had 8 declarations. You need to know the first 2, all right? First, that oral education was deemed superior to sign, right? They thought of sign as more mime and not really a language, right? This is 1880. This is, yeah. All right, and that there would be no SimCom. SimCom is signing and talking at the same time. If you talk and sign at the same time, then the deaf person will not learn to speak, and that is very important. How could this happen? How could we let this happen? Here's how. Let's see. Okay. Well, it happened in Italy, so most of the people that went were Italian, right? And then we have French, British, American. Oh yeah, there's 11 of us who said, no, we should have sign. Yeah. Swedish, Belgium, and Germany, right? Only 164 people were there at this conference. right? If you ever go to a conference, you'll know that there are always more than 164. Anyway, only one of those people was deaf. Yeah, only one person was deaf out of 164. That's really sad. Hey, I want sign language to be the communication. I think that's best. I really like that. Oh, that's very nice, deaf person. Please move while we try to decide the future of deaf people. Yeah, thanks. All right. Also, the majority of the people who ran this conference were actually in support of oral education. So the majority of the people were there. In fact, it was probably even secret, confidential, that they didn't want to tell everybody that this conference was happening. Okay, so there you have it. Most of the people that wanted to decide education for deaf people were hearing, preferred oralism, and thought deaf people probably were dumb. So this did affect deaf history. In fact, this is probably the biggest event in deaf history, and it has continued its effects. The immediate effects: deaf teachers, well, they lost their jobs, right? I mean, a deaf person can't teach you how to lip read. So a lot of the schools that changed from sign and to oralism, well, then the deaf teacher left. And there were probably even some hearing teachers that thought that this was wrong and left too. But it's harder for deaf people, especially in the 1880s, to get a job. So teaching was the best one. All right, the NAD gained support. What do you think the NAD stands for? Yes, the National Association of the Deaf. Right, so they fight for deaf rights, okay? And this was a big one, right? In fact, the NAD was established in 1880, the same year as Milan, Italy conference. Coinciding? I don't think so. All right, and then thankfully, the president of Gallaudet University, right? It's now university, back then it was college. He proclaimed that sign language would continue to be the language at the campus. Thank goodness, right? He said that we would not have oralism. All right, that definitely helped. So these were immediate effects. Long term, right? We have beautiful pieces of art. You should just research deaf art. There's some awesome and very moving pieces. This piece, this part of history really influenced people, and they were able to, show their emotions and their thoughts and their feelings and all their happenings with art, right? Paintings, drawing, sculpture, and that. Oralism and sign have figured out how to coexist, not always friendly, but they put up with each other. And especially if you ask and talk with older deaf people, ask them about their education and their experience and just growing up and their experiences. Self-esteem is, sometimes kind of low, right? Kind of doubtful, wondering if, you know, they're good enough in that. So, all right. That's Milan, Italy, 1880. All right. Let's just move on to the NAD, the National Association of the Deaf. All right. It was established in 1880, right? The NAD fights for what? Deaf rights, right? They have fought for big things and little things. Sometimes seemingly little at the time, but later we're like, wow. For deaf people to be able to adopt, for deaf people to be able to drive, to be able to get different jobs, right? To prove it. For deaf people to be able to, for there to actually be captions on TV. Yeah, we had to fight for that to be a law in the 60s, 70s, I think 80s. Yeah, fought for that. Crazy. The one president that we remember the most, he's the 7th president, I think he was the 7th and 9th, he got 2 terms, is George Vedetz, all right? Now, George Vedetz is known because he was seeing that sign, well, people didn't like sign, right? He had the oral stigma, and so he wanted to preserve sign. So he filmed it, right? He filmed deaf people conversing, plays, telling stories, whatever. And he was able to help preserve. So with Gallaudet University keeping sign language on campus and George Vedetz filming sign, those two together really helped sign language be able to continue on and not die. There you go. All right. Now we have 2 laws that deaf, hard of hearing, disabled people use, right? The first one is the the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, right? 504. That means there's 503 sections before it. Fun. All right, see, right here we have rehabilitation, all right? I want you to think, right? Discrimination, rehabilitation, discrimination. Got it? So, the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, fights against discrimination. Now, only deaf people? No. For any person with a physical or mental disability, right? Now, you're right. Deaf people say, I'm not disabled. But when you have a law that helps you, you use it, all right? So, to fight against discrimination, because people are pretty discriminatory, right? Especially with work, right? I don't want to hire you. You're deaf. I have to get an interpreter, blah, 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 right? That's discrimination and against the law. Yep. Right? You can't just say, he discriminated against me. You actually have to prove that you are capable of doing the job, and also that you should have gotten the job, right? There are typically multiple candidates for the same job. All right, and employer must provide reasonable accommodations, right? The employer must provide reasonable accommodations. What does that mean? Well, an interpreter, but maybe you don't need an interpreter every day, maybe for staff meetings. Or if you're in a wheelchair, being able to make sure that the bathroom has, a stall that's, for handicap accessibility, parking, entrances, doors, those kinds of things. But reasonable. So like if a building, a workplace has the break room upstairs, and there's no elevator, being able to provide a place for that person, because building an elevator is quite expensive. All right. Now, the next law is the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. All right. So, it was passed in 1990. You think that was a long time ago, but it really wasn't. I say that because I was alive. But then kind of added to, changed in 2009. You were alive, hopefully. All right. So think of ADA, and the A for access. All right. Right. It fights for equal access. What does that mean? For a deaf person to be able to go to a play and have an interpreter there. For a person in a wheelchair to be able to have ramps to be able to get up. Even like a person with crutches. For a blind person with the signs, being able to read them. Okay, so things like that, being able to have access. Phones for emergencies, those kinds of things. All right. Who pays for those? Those people who are that claim disability, or the businesses? The businesses, right? Like Tuacahn has to provide an interpreter for the person who wants to watch the play, right? Hale Theater pays for an interpreter, pays for the ramp. Okay. Yep. If ever anyone feels like the company is not following ADA, they can call and serve a warning. Okay. So ADA, equal access. Okay. To information things. This is also for people with physical or mental disability, right? So when you go to college, and maybe you have a mental disability or a physical disability, go to the Disability Resource Center in your college or university and make sure that you make contact with them and see what services they provide, because it could be very helpful for you and your success. Yep. All right. Here we have the Fraternal Society of the Deaf. Now, it's not a frat, right? Fraternal means men, okay? It was established in 1901, right? It was, back then in the early 1900s, deaf men, because women were still, were not provided insurance, right? Why do you think that is? Right, because you're deaf, right? You must be like super like accident prone, and you can't hear, so like, man, like what happens? There you go. So, yeah, deaf people have been picked on. So, A group of deaf gentlemen decided that they would establish their own insurance for deaf people. So, all right. So it grew small. It was started small, but it grew all over the nation. Woo! And continued up until, what was it? 2007. Wow, 1901 to 2007. That's awesome. Insurance company. All right. Why do you think they stopped in 2007? Yeah, because insurance was finally being provided, right? People became smarter, a little bit wiser, and so the Fraternal Society decided, you know what, we're not needed anymore, so we'll just disband. Right? They had their last meeting at Gallaudet University, so that's pretty cool. Fraternal Society. All right. I think that's it. Let's see. Yep. All right. Those were some laws and the Milan, Italy Conference of 1880. Good luck. Happy studying.